Montana Territory, 1885. A land where the Rocky Mountain foothills stretched endlessly toward heaven, where a woman's dreams could either flourish in the crisp mountain air or shatter against the harsh realities of frontier life. Most women who ventured west came seeking husbands, homesteads, or hopes of gold strikes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But what happens when the gentle giant who offers you honest work and fair wages turns out to harbor secrets that could destroy everything you've worked to build? This is the story of Elena Martinez, a traveling cook from California whose search for a fresh start led her straight into the heart of a conflict that would test not only her courage but her capacity to trust again, until a towering rancher with shoulders broad, enough to carry the weight of the world, offered her something she never expected to find in the rugged wilderness of Montana Territory, a love worth fighting for. Elena Martinez wiped the sweat from her brow as the stagecoach lurched over another rocky outcrop, her wooden spoon rolling across the floor of the cramped compartment for the third time in an hour. The Montana landscape rolling past the dusty window bore no resemblance to the gentle coastal hills of her California childhood, yet something about the raw majesty of these mountains called to her restless spirit. She had been traveling for 6 days now, leaving behind the ruins of her former life in Sacramento, where the restaurant she had poured her heart into had crumbled beneath the weight of her business partner's gambling debts. The letter in her worn leather satchel had arrived at precisely the right moment, when creditors were circling like vultures and her landlord had given her 1 week to settle her accounts or face eviction. Samuel Whitmore of Thunder Creek Ranch was seeking an experienced cook to manage meals for his ranch hands and occasional guests, offering wages that seemed almost too generous for frontier work. His correspondence had been direct and businesslike, mentioning only that he required someone capable of feeding 20 men 3 meals a day, with occasional larger gatherings during cattle drives and seasonal roundups. At 28, Elena had established herself as one of the finest cooks in Northern California, her reputation built on the fusion of Mexican flavors inherited from her grandmother and French techniques, learned during a brief apprenticeship in San Francisco. But reputation meant little when faced with financial ruin, and the promise of a steady position in Montana Territory represented salvation from circumstances that had left her questioning everything she thought she knew about trust and partnership. Her former business partner, Roberto Valdez, had seemed like the answer to her prayers when he proposed combining her culinary skills with his supposed business, acumen to open the finest restaurant Sacramento had ever seen. For 18 months, Casa Elena had thrived, drawing customers from across Northern California who came to experience Elena's innovative dishes that honored her heritage while embracing contemporary techniques. Roberto handled the books and front of house operations while Elena focused on creating the magical experiences that kept patrons returning week after week. The discovery of Roberto's betrayal had come through a late-night conversation with their wine supplier, who mentioned concerns about payment delays and Roberto's frequent visits to the gambling halls on the Sacramento waterfront. Elena's investigation revealed systematic theft that had been occurring for months, with Roberto skimming receipts and using restaurant credit to cover his mounting gambling losses. By the time she uncovered the full extent of his deception, Casa Elena owed debts that exceeded twice its actual value, and Roberto had disappeared one night, taking with him not only the restaurant's remaining cash reserves, but also Elena's grandmother's silver serving pieces that had been displayed as part of the restaurant's authentic decor. The legal proceedings that followed had been swift and merciless. California creditor laws offered little protection for Elena's position as the unknowing partner in Roberto's schemes, and within weeks, everything she had worked years to build was auctioned off to satisfy debts she had never authorized. The judge's sympathetic expression had done nothing to soften the reality that Elena Martinez once considered one of the most promising restaurateurs in the region, was left with little more than her personal belongings and a reputation tarnished by association with Roberto's criminal activities. The stagecoach driver's voice calling out landmarks brought Elena back to the present moment and the decision that had led her to this remote corner of Montana territory. Samuel Whitmore's letter had contained no flowery language or romantic promises, only a straightforward offer of employment at wages that would allow her to rebuild her savings while working in an environment far removed from the painful memories of California. His description of Thunder Creek Ranch suggested a prosperous operation that could provide the stability she desperately needed while she planned her next steps. Through the coach window, Elena caught her first glimpse of Silverbrook Valley, a vast expanse of grassland dotted with cattle that seemed to stretch infinitely towards snow-capped peaks that rose like cathedral spires against the afternoon sky. The beauty of the landscape took her breath away, its untamed majesty, so different from California's coastal refinement that it seemed to belong to an entirely different world. This was land that demanded respect rather than merely admiration. Territory that would test every skill she possessed while offering opportunities that existed nowhere else. The town of Millfield appeared gradually as the stagecoach descended into the valley, a collection of wooden buildings that seemed both substantial and temporary, as if the entire community might pack up and move to better prospects at any moment. Unlike the established settlements of California, Millfield bore the marks of recent construction and rapid growth, with new buildings rising beside older structures in a pattern that spoke of ambition tempered by practical necessity. Elena observed the townspeople going about their afternoon business with the efficient purposefulness she had noticed throughout her journey into Montana territory. Men and women moved with the confident stride of people who had chosen this difficult life rather than having it forced upon them, their faces weathered by mountain winds, but showing none of the desperation she had expected to find in such a remote location. Children played in the dusty streets while their mothers conducted business at the general store and blacksmith shop, creating an atmosphere of community stability that impressed Elena despite the town's rough appearance. The stagecoach depot occupied a prominent position on Millfield's main street, its wooden platform bustling with activity as passengers disembarked and freight was sorted for distribution throughout the surrounding ranches. Elena gathered her belongings, including the heavy wooden crate containing her grandmother's remaining cooking implements, and the collection of spice jars that represented years of experimentation and refinement. These tools were all that remained of her culinary career, carefully preserved through the collapse of everything else she had built. A massive figure separated itself from the group of men waiting near the depot, moving toward the stagecoach with surprising grace for someone of such imposing stature. Elena realized this had to be Samuel Whitmore, though his letters had failed to convey the sheer physical presence of a man who stood well over 6 feet tall with shoulders that seemed capable of supporting the entire Montana sky. His weathered face showed the permanent tan of someone who spent his days outdoors, while his dark hair and beard were streaked with early gray that suggested experience beyond his apparent age. Samuel's blue eyes met Elena's as she stepped down from the stagecoach, and she felt an immediate assessment taking place, as if he were evaluating not just her appearance, but her capability for the demanding work ahead. His expression remained carefully neutral, though Elena caught a flicker of something that might have been surprise, as if her appearance differed from whatever he had been expecting based on their correspondence. "Miss Martinez," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command while maintaining a respectful tone that immediately put Elena at ease. "Welcome to Millfield. I trust your journey wasn't too difficult." His handshake was firm but careful, as if he were conscious of his strength and its potential to overwhelm someone of smaller stature. Elena appreciated his directness after weeks of dealing with California lawyers and creditors who had spoken in circles while delivering devastating news. "Mr. Whitmore, Thank you for meeting me personally. The journey was long but manageable, and I'm eager to see Thunder Creek Ranch and discuss the specific requirements for the position." Samuel's expression relaxed slightly at her businesslike response, though Elena noticed his eyes taking in details of her appearance and demeanor with the careful attention of someone who had learned to read people quickly and accurately. "The ranch is about an hour's ride from town. I've brought a wagon for your belongings and a gentle mare for you to ride, assuming you're comfortable on horseback." The question revealed an assumption about her frontier skills that Elena found both amusing and slightly challenging. In California, she had ridden occasionally for pleasure, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for the practical horsemanship that Montana territory would undoubtedly require. "I can manage well enough, though I suspect your definition of gentle might differ from what I'm accustomed to in California." This response drew what Elena believed was Samuel's first genuine smile since her arrival, transforming his weathered features and revealing a warmth that his business correspondence. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Had only hinted at. Lady is probably the most patient horse in Montana territory. She's been teaching nervous riders for years and has never met a challenge she couldn't handle. As Samuel's ranch hands loaded Elena's belongings into the wagon, she noticed the easy camaraderie between the massive rancher and his workers. These men clearly respected their employer, but their interaction suggested mutual regard rather than the fear-based hierarchy she had observed in other business relationships. The way Samuel addressed each man by name while inquiring about their families and specific work concerns revealed a management style based on personal investment rather than mere economic convenience. The ride to Thunder Creek Ranch provided Elena with her first real opportunity to observe the scope of Samuel's operation and the landscape that would become her new home. The valley stretched for miles in every direction, with thousands of cattle grazing across grasslands that seemed to roll endlessly toward the distant mountains. Fence lines marked property boundaries with mathematical precision, while windmills and water tanks indicated the careful planning required to sustain such an extensive operation in Montana's demanding climate. Samuel rode beside Elena's wagon, occasionally pointing out landmarks or explaining aspects of ranch operations that would affect her work. His voice carried obvious pride in what he had built, though Elena detected underlying tensions that suggested his success had not come without significant challenges. References to neighboring properties and water rights disputes hinted at complications that extended beyond the daily management of cattle and horses. "Thunder Creek Ranch employs 23 men year-round," Samuel explained as they approached. A rise that would provide their first view of the ranch buildings. During roundup and cattle drive seasons, that number can increase to 40 or more, depending on market conditions and weather factors. The men work hard and deserve meals that acknowledge their contribution to the ranch's success. Elena appreciated both his respect for his workers and the implicit challenge in his statement. Feeding large numbers of working men required skills that differed significantly from restaurant cooking, demanding efficiency and heartiness over the presentation and refinement that had made her California reputation. "Mr. Whitmore, what cooking facilities are available, and what supplies can be reliably obtained either locally or through special ordering?" The practical nature of her question seemed to please Samuel, whose answers revealed extensive preparation for her arrival. The ranch kitchen had been recently expanded and equipped with professional-grade equipment including a massive wood-burning range, cold storage facilities, and preparation areas designed for high-volume cooking. Millfield's General Store could provide basic staples, while special orders could be arranged through the railroad depot for more exotic ingredients her cooking might require. As they crested the rise, Thunder Creek Ranch spread out before them like something from Elena's most ambitious dreams of frontier prosperity. The main house was a magnificent log structure with stone foundations and a wraparound porch that suggested both comfort and durability. Outbuildings included a bunkhouse, barns, corrals, and various work buildings, all arranged with the logical efficiency of someone who understood both practical necessity and aesthetic appeal. The ranch kitchen occupied a separate building connected to the main house by a covered walkway, its size and equipment immediately impressing Elena with Samuel's commitment to providing quality meals for his workers. Windows on 3 sides provided excellent natural light, while the massive range and preparation areas suggested possibilities that made her pulse quicken with professional excitement. "This is extraordinary," Elena said, her voice carrying genuine admiration for the facilities Samuel had prepared. "I've worked in restaurants that weren't this well equipped. You've clearly given considerable thought to the practical requirements of large-scale cooking." Samuel's expression showed both pride and something that might have been relief at her positive response. "My father always said that keeping good workers requires more than just fair wages. Men who eat well work better and stay loyal longer. I wanted to ensure that whoever took this position would have everything necessary to succeed." Elena spent the remainder of the afternoon touring the kitchen facilities and meeting the ranch hands who would depend on her culinary skills. The men ranged in age from barely 18 to well into their 60s, representing various backgrounds and ethnicities that reflected Montana Territory's diverse population. Their respectful but curious attitudes toward her suggested both skepticism about her ability to meet their needs and genuine hope that she would prove capable of the demanding work ahead. Jim Cooper, the ranch foreman, provided Elena with practical information about meal schedules, dietary preferences, and special considerations for men whose work required enormous physical energy. His weathered face and careful questions revealed decades of frontier experience, while his obvious loyalty to Samuel suggested the kind of mutual respect that characterized successful ranch operations. "Miss Martinez," Jim said as he concluded their discussion of kitchen protocols, "these men have been making do with basic cooking since our last cook moved back east 3 months ago. They're hoping you can provide meals that remind them why they chose this life instead of easier work." In town, the challenge in his statement was clear, though Elena detected no hostility in his manner. Jim Cooper was simply ensuring that she understood the responsibility she was accepting and the standards she would be expected to meet. "Mr. Cooper, I've built my career on creating food that nourishes both body and spirit. I hope to prove that quality meals are possible even under frontier conditions." Dinner that first evening provided Elena with her initial test of both the kitchen facilities and the ranch hands' expectations. Using supplies already available, she prepared a meal that combined efficiency with flavors that went well beyond basic frontier fare. Her grandmother's recipe for spiced beef stew, enhanced with herbs she had noticed growing wild near the kitchen garden, drew immediate approval from men accustomed to much simpler preparations. Samuel observed the meal from his position at the head of the long wooden table that dominated the ranch's dining area, his expression carefully neutral, though Elena caught moments when his attention focused on her with an intensity that made her self-conscious. His compliments on the food were measured and appropriate, though she sensed deeper appreciation beneath his reserved demeanor. After the hands had returned to their evening activities, Samuel lingered in the kitchen while Elena cleaned up from her first meal service. His presence filled the large space with an energy that Elena found both comforting and slightly overwhelming, as if his sheer physical presence created its own weather system that affected everything around him. "Miss Martinez," he said finally, his voice carrying a formality that seemed forced after the easy interactions of the afternoon. "I want you to know that the men were impressed with tonight's meal. It's been a while since anyone put that kind of care into their food." Elena appreciated the compliment while recognizing the careful distance Samuel maintained between them. His professional demeanor suggested a man who had learned to be cautious about personal relationships, though she caught glimpses of warmth that indicated greater depths beneath his reserved surface. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. I hope to continue." Meeting their expectations as I become more familiar with available supplies and preferences. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Tommy Mitchell, a young ranch hand whose excited demeanor suggested news that couldn't wait for morning. "Boss, there's riders coming up the valley road. Looks like maybe 6 or 8 men. Moving fast toward the ranch." Samuel's entire demeanor transformed instantly, his relaxed posture shifting to alert readiness as he moved toward the window to assess the approaching riders. Elena watched with growing concern as his expression darkened with recognition, suggesting that these late-night visitors represented trouble rather than social calls. "Tommy, wake Jim and tell the men to be ready, but not obvious about it," Samuel instructed, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions under pressure. "Miss Martinez, you should probably go to your room in the main house until we know what this is about." Elena felt a chill of fear as she realized that her first day at Thunder Creek Ranch was about to be complicated by dangers she had never considered when accepting Samuel's employment offer. The approaching riders and Samuel's reaction suggested conflicts that extended far beyond normal ranch operations, introducing elements of risk that made her question everything she thought she knew about her new situation. Through the kitchen window, Elena could see torches flickering in the distance, growing steadily closer as the mysterious riders approached Thunder Creek Ranch with obvious urgency. Samuel's tense preparation and the quick response of his ranch hands indicated that such late-night visits were not entirely unexpected, suggesting ongoing tensions that Samuel's letters had never mentioned. As the sound of approaching horses grew louder, Elena realized that her search for a peaceful, fresh start in Montana territory had led her directly into circumstances that might prove far more dangerous than the financial difficulties she had left behind in California. The massive rancher who had offered her employment was clearly involved in conflicts that could threaten not only her safety, but her ability to build the stable future she desperately needed. Samuel Whitmore stood silhouetted against the kitchen window, his imposing figure tense with anticipation as he watched the approaching riders. Elena found herself studying his profile in the lamplight, noting the determined set of his jaw and the way his hands unconsciously checked the placement of his sidearm. This was not the careful, professional demeanor he had maintained throughout their afternoon together, but rather the alertness of a man prepared for violence. The realization that she had potentially exchanged one set of problems for another filled Elena with familiar dread, though this time the threat came not from financial ruin but from dangers she couldn't yet identify or understand. As the riders drew closer to Thunder Creek Ranch, Elena prepared herself for revelations that would test everything she had hoped to build in Montana territory. The riders materialized from the darkness like specters of trouble, their horses snorting and stamping as they pulled up in the ranch yard with military precision. Elena counted 8 men, all armed and carrying themselves with the confident aggression of people accustomed to getting their way through intimidation. The leader, a well-dressed man in his 40s with silver hair and calculating eyes, dismounted with practiced ease despite his obvious wealth and city refinement. Samuel stepped onto the ranch house porch, his massive frame silhouetted against the lamplight streaming from behind him. Elena watched from the kitchen window as Jim Cooper and several ranch hands positioned themselves strategically around the yard, their casual poses failing to disguise their readiness for whatever might develop from this unexpected nighttime visit. "Whitmore," the silver-haired man called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate attention. "We need to talk. Business that can't wait for daylight hours." Samuel's response was measured and calm, though Elena could see the tension in his shoulders. "Blackwood, it's past 9 o'clock and this is private property. Whatever business you think we have can wait until tomorrow when decent people conduct their affairs." Marcus Blackwood, Elena had heard that name whispered in Millfield during her brief stop at the general store, always accompanied by expressions that suggested fear mixed with resentment. The man before her represented everything she had hoped to escape by coming to Montana Territory: wealth used as a weapon, power exercised without regard for consequences, and the kind of ruthless ambition that destroyed everything in its path. Blackwood's laugh held no humor, only the cold calculation of a predator who had cornered his prey. Decent people don't squat on land that belongs to others, Whitmore. Decent people honor legal contracts and pay their debts when called upon. The accusation hung in the night air like smoke from a dangerous fire, suggesting complications in Samuel's situation that his employment letters had never mentioned. Elena felt her stomach clench with familiar dread as she recognized the pattern of threats disguised as business discussions, the same tone Roberto had used when explaining why various restaurant supplies had mysteriously disappeared or why certain bills couldn't be paid despite steady customer revenue. Samuel descended the porch steps with deliberate slowness, his hands remaining visible but positioned where he could reach his sidearm if necessary. My father bought this land legally from the territorial government 20 years ago. The deed is filed properly in Helena, and all taxes have been paid on time every year since. What debt are you referring to, Blackwood? The silver-haired man produced a leather portfolio from his coat, withdrawing documents that he held up like weapons in the lamplight. Your father's purchase was based on a survey that failed to account for prior claims, filed by the Montana Land Development Company. Legal review has determined that Thunder Creek Ranch occupies territory that rightfully belongs to my organization. Elena watched Samuel's reaction with growing alarm as she recognized the systematic legal manipulation that had destroyed her own business in California. Blackwood wasn't simply making threats, he was implementing a carefully planned strategy to steal Samuel's ranch through bureaucratic warfare that would be nearly impossible to fight through legitimate channels. Jim Cooper moved closer to Samuel's position, his weathered face grim with understanding of what Blackwood's claims really meant. Boss, this sounds like the same legal tricks they used on the Henderson spread last year. Papers that suddenly appeared after 20 years, surveys that contradicted territorial records, judges who found reasons to overturn legitimate ownership. The foreman's grim statement confirmed what Elena had feared most. The troubling situation unfolding before her was exactly the kind of orchestrated takeover she had heard about. Blackwood symbolized the same calculated corruption that had crushed countless small businesses and independent ranches across the Western Territories. Through legal loopholes and paid-off officials, he was able to seize land that couldn't be taken honestly. His unnervingly bright smile cut through the gloom, a detail that suggested he took as much care with his image as he did with the efficient, brutal reputation he had earned. Jim Cooper, isn't it? Blackwood said smoothly. I remember you from the old cattle drive days. A sharp man like you ought to know when to start looking for a new job before things get uncomfortable. The threat, though polished and professional, was unmistakable. Blackwood wasn't just trying to take Samuel's land. He was methodically breaking down the entire operation, targeting the very workers who kept Thunder Creek Ranch running. Samuel responded with calm authority, his voice firm but steady. My men are here because they want to be. Any threats against them will be dealt with accordingly. Elena's heartbeat quickened. Tension was rising fast, and she sensed that things could explode into violence at any second. Blackwood's 8 armed riders circled like vultures, giving him the advantage in numbers. Still, she could tell Samuel wasn't someone easily pushed around. Blackwood gestured casually toward his men, the confident motion implying he believed his victory was all but guaranteed. Whitmore, I'm giving you a chance to walk away from this peacefully. The Montana Land Development Company is prepared to buy your assets and livestock at fair market value. That way, you can leave without the hassle of legal delays. On the surface, the offer sounded reasonable, but Elena knew better. The so-called fair market value would be decided by the very people trying to steal the land. And those legal delays hinted at courts already bought or intimidated into submission. Samuel didn't flinch. His reply was measured and intelligent. Any documents you claim to have will need to be reviewed by my lawyer in Helena. Legal experts can determine whether your claims are genuine. Blackwood's smile faded. He clearly didn't like the idea of outside scrutiny. Whitmore, legal delays come with consequences. Out here, things happen. Cattle vanish, workers quit, accidents occur. Waiting too long can cost more than. Settling quickly, Elena felt a chill run down her spine. Blackwood wasn't just threatening legal action, he was making it clear he'd use sabotage, violence, and fear to get what he wanted. The riders around him weren't just for intimidation, they were muscle, ready to enforce his will by force if necessary. Tommy Mitchell appeared beside Elena, his young face pale with a mix of fear and awe. "Miss Martinez, this is bad." Blackwood's been taking over ranches all across the valley for 2 years. Anyone who stands up to him ends up with fires, missing cattle, or worse. Tommy's words confirmed what Elena was beginning to grasp. Samuel's offer of employment had placed her at the heart of a much larger struggle. This wasn't just business. Blackwood was part of a systematic corruption that was reshaping Montana territory into a place ruled by wealth and fear, where power mattered more than law. Despite the mounting danger, Samuel remained calm. Elena could see the wheels turning in his mind, weighing their limited options against the overwhelming threat before them. "I appreciate your concern, Blackwood," Samuel said evenly. "But Thunder Creek Ranch has faced hard times before. We'll handle whatever comes and protect what's rightfully ours." His quiet confidence clearly frustrated Blackwood, whose strategy relied on fear and immediate capitulation. Stepping closer, his silver hair catching the lantern light, Blackwood tried one last intimidation tactic. "You're making this more difficult than it has to be, Whitmore. Wise men know when to cut their losses and take the best deal available. The stubborn ones, they lose everything, and all their fighting ends in nothing but ruin." Elena watched the confrontation with growing admiration for Samuel's refusal to be intimidated, despite being vastly outnumbered. His massive frame remained relaxed and confident, as if Blackwood's threats were merely inconvenient rather than potentially lethal. The contrast between the two men was striking. Samuel's honest strength against Blackwood's corrupt manipulation. Frontier integrity facing urban sophistication turned predatory. Jim Cooper's movement caught Elena's attention. As the foreman positioned himself where he could support Samuel if the confrontation turned violent, the older man's weathered face showed the grim determination of someone who had faced similar challenges throughout his frontier career, recognizing that backing down from Blackwood would only encourage more aggressive demands in the future. "Boss," Jim said quietly, his voice carrying to Elena's position near the kitchen window, "the men are ready for whatever comes next. We've dealt with claim jumpers and rustlers before. This isn't much different except for the fancy clothes and legal paperwork." Blackwood's attention shifted to the foreman with obvious irritation at the interruption to his carefully orchestrated intimidation performance. "Cooper, men your age should be thinking about retirement rather than fighting battles they can't win. The Montana Land Development Company offers excellent severance packages for experienced workers who demonstrate wisdom rather than misplaced loyalty." The attempt to buy Jim's cooperation revealed the systematic approach Blackwood used to dismantle resistance to his schemes. By offering financial incentives to key employees while threatening violence against those who refused to cooperate, he created divisions within organizations that made effective resistance nearly impossible. Samuel's response demonstrated his understanding of Blackwood's tactics and his determination to protect his workers from such manipulation. Jim Cooper has been foreman of Thunder Creek Ranch for 15 years. His loyalty isn't for sale, and any attempts to threaten or bribe my employees will be met with appropriate consequences. Elena felt her heart racing as she realized the confrontation was approaching a crisis point where words would give way to action. Blackwood's frustration with Samuel's resistance was becoming increasingly obvious, while the armed riders positioned around the ranch yard seemed to be awaiting signals that would transform the business discussion into something far more dangerous. Blackwood pulled out a gold pocket watch and checked the time with theatrical precision, as if timing were crucial to whatever he planned to do next. "Whitmore, you have 24 hours to reconsider my generous offer. After that, circumstances may develop that make negotiation far more difficult for everyone involved." The ultimatum carried implications that sent chills through Elena's entire body. 24 hours suggested a deadline connected to specific plans rather than general threats, indicating that Blackwood had already arranged whatever pressure he intended to apply to force Samuel's compliance with his demands. Samuel's response revealed no trace of the fear that Blackwood's threats were clearly intended to inspire. "Blackwood, I'll consider your paperwork when my attorney has reviewed its legitimacy. Until then, Thunder Creek Ranch continues operating exactly as it has for the past 20 years. The massive rancher's calm defiance seemed to surprise Blackwood, whose strategy clearly depended on intimidating opponents into immediate surrender, rather than facing prolonged resistance from people who refused to be bullied. His silver hair caught the lamplight as he gestured toward his mounted associates with barely controlled frustration. "Very well, Whitmore. I've made my position clear and offered reasonable terms for resolving this matter peacefully. What happens next will be entirely the result of your own choices." Elena watched with growing dread as Blackwood and his riders prepared to leave Thunder Creek Ranch, their departure carrying implications that were somehow more threatening than their arrival had been. The silver-haired man's parting words suggested plans that extended beyond simple legal maneuvering into territory that could prove deadly for anyone who continued resisting his expansion schemes. As the riders disappeared into the darkness, Samuel remained on the porch for several minutes, his massive frame silhouetted against the lamplight while he studied the night sky. As if searching for signs of approaching storms, Elena found herself studying his profile, noting the determined set of his jaw and the way his hands unconsciously checked his weapons, despite the immediate threat having withdrawn. Jim Cooper approached the porch with obvious concern etched across his weathered features. "Boss, this is worse than I thought. Blackwood's not making idle threats, he's implementing a plan that's been months in development. The timing suggests coordination with territorial officials who can provide legal cover for whatever he's planning." Samuel's nod acknowledged the foreman's assessment while revealing his own understanding of the systematic nature of Blackwood's assault on Thunder Creek Ranch. "Jim, double the watch rotation and make sure all the men understand that we're facing more than simple rustlers or claim jumpers. Blackwood has resources and connections that make him far more dangerous than ordinary criminals." Elena felt her stomach clench with familiar dread as she realized that her search for a peaceful fresh start had led her directly into another situation where powerful interests threatened to destroy everything she hoped to build. The parallels to her California experience were unmistakable: systematic deception, legal manipulation designed to steal legitimate property, and the use of threats and intimidation to force compliance with demands that no honest person should have to accept. Samuel's attention turned toward the kitchen window where Elena stood watching the aftermath of Blackwood's visit. His blue eyes met hers across the distance, and she saw something in his expression that hadn't been there during their afternoon. Together, a recognition that her presence at Thunder Creek Ranch had become complicated by circumstances neither of them had anticipated. "Miss Martinez," he called, his voice carrying easily across the ranch yard. "I think we need to have another conversation about the specific requirements of your position here." Elena felt her pulse quicken as she understood that Samuel was about to reveal aspects of her employment that his letters had never mentioned. The professional cooking position she had accepted was clearly more complicated than preparing meals for ranch hands, involving risks and responsibilities that extended far beyond anything she had agreed to when accepting his offer. As she walked from the kitchen toward the main house, Elena's mind raced through the implications of what she had witnessed. Blackwood's threats and Samuel's response suggested a conflict that could escalate into violence at any moment, potentially trapping her in the middle of a war between powerful interests that would show no concern for her safety or welfare. Samuel held the front door open as Elena approached, his massive frame seeming to fill the entire doorway, while his expression remained carefully neutral. "I apologize for the unexpected excitement on your first evening at Thunder Creek Ranch, Marcus. Blackwood has a talent for creating complications at the worst possible moments." Elena stepped into the ranch house's main room, noting details that had escaped her attention during the afternoon tour. The furnishings were substantial and well-made, but she now noticed defensive preparations that suggested Samuel had been expecting trouble for some time. Windows had been reinforced with shutters that could serve as barriers during an attack, while weapons racks positioned throughout the room indicated readiness for siege conditions. "Mr. Whitmore," Elena said carefully, choosing her words with the same precision she had learned to employ when dealing with Roberto's increasingly erratic explanations for missing restaurant funds. "I think you should tell me exactly what kind of situation I've accepted employment in, and what risks that might involve for someone in my position." Samuel's expression showed both respect for her directness and something that might have been regret for the circumstances that required such a conversation. "Miss Martinez, when I wrote offering you employment, I hoped that Blackwood's legal challenges could be resolved through normal territorial procedures. Recent developments suggest that optimism was misplaced." Elena settled into a chair that provided a clear view of both Samuel and the windows that looked out over the ranch yard, positioning herself where she could observe his reactions while maintaining awareness of potential external threats. Her experience with Roberto had taught her to watch for signs of deception, though Samuel's demeanor suggested honesty rather than the calculated manipulation she had learned to recognize. "What kind of recent developments?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer from observing Blackwood's systematic approach to intimidation and legal manipulation. Samuel moved to the fireplace, his massive frame seeming to absorb light from the flames as he considered how much to reveal about Thunder Creek Ranch's precarious situation. 3 other ranches in Silverbrook Valley have been forced to sell to the Montana Land Development Company over the past 18 months. Each case involved sudden discoveries of prior claims, legal challenges that exhausted the owner's resources, and mysterious accidents that made resistance impossible to maintain. Elena felt cold dread settle in her stomach as she recognized the pattern of systematic theft that had destroyed her own business in California. "Mr. Whitmore, are you telling me that Blackwood is using legal manipulation and intimidation to steal established ranches throughout the valley?" The massive rancher's nod confirmed her worst fears about the situation she had unwittingly entered. Thunder Creek Ranch is the largest remaining independent operation in Silverbrook Valley. If Blackwood succeeds in taking our property, he'll control virtually all the grazing land and water rights between here and the territorial border. The implications of Blackwood's scheme were staggering in their scope and potential impact on everyone who depended on Thunder Creek Ranch for employment and economic stability. Elena realized that her position as ranch cook had placed her at the center of a conflict that could determine the future of the entire valley, involving stakes far beyond her personal need for steady employment. "How long do you think we have before Blackwood's next move?" Elena asked, surprising herself by using the word "we" as if she had already committed to staying despite the dangers involved. Samuel's blue eyes studied her face with obvious surprise at her apparent willingness to remain at Thunder Creek Ranch despite learning about the risks her employment would involve. Based on his timeline tonight, I'd estimate less than a week before he escalates beyond legal threats to more direct action. Elena found herself remembering Roberto's pattern of escalating deception and manipulation when his gambling debts had made normal business operations impossible. The desperation that drove people to extreme measures followed predictable patterns, though Blackwood's resources and connections made him far more dangerous than a simple embezzling partner. "Mr. Whitmore," she said carefully, meeting his gaze, directly while choosing words that would demonstrate her understanding of the situation's gravity. "I came to Montana Territory seeking a fresh start after losing everything I built in California to a business partner's criminal activities. I understand what it means to face people who use deception and intimidation to steal other people's work." Samuel's expression shifted from surprise to something that might have been respect as he recognized the parallels between her experience and his current situation. "Miss Martinez, I won't ask you to stay if you believe the risks are too great. I can arrange safe passage back to California or anywhere else you might want to establish yourself." The offer was genuine and generous, though Elena detected disappointment beneath Samuel's professional courtesy. He had clearly hoped that her cooking skills could provide some stability for his ranch hands during the difficult period ahead. But his integrity wouldn't allow him to trap her in dangerous circumstances through concealment or manipulation. Elena considered her options while studying Samuel's weathered face in the firelight. Returning to California would mean facing the wreckage of her former life while searching for employment in a market that had already rejected her through no fault of her own. Staying at Thunder Creek Ranch meant accepting risks that could prove deadly, but it also offered the possibility of fighting back against the kind of systematic corruption that had destroyed her previous hopes. "Mr. Whitmore," she said finally, her voice carrying conviction that surprised her with its strength, "I've already lost everything once to people like Blackwood, who use power and connections to steal what belongs to others. Running away didn't solve my problems in California, and it won't solve them here either." Samuel's massive frame seemed to relax slightly at her words, though his expression remained carefully neutral. "Miss Martinez, if you choose to stay, you should understand that this situation may require more than simply cooking meals for ranch hands. Blackwood's tactics include targeting support systems that keep independent operations functioning." Elena felt her pulse quicken as she began to understand the full implications of remaining at Thunder Creek Ranch during Blackwood's assault on Samuel's property. Her position as cook would make her a target for intimidation or worse, while her skills might be called upon to serve roles that extended far beyond normal culinary responsibilities. "What kind of additional responsibilities might that involve?" she asked, though part of her mind was already beginning to formulate possibilities based on her understanding of Blackwood's systematic approach to destroying resistance. Samuel's answer would determine whether Elena Martinez committed herself to another battle against corruption and greed, or whether she chose the safer path of retreat from circumstances that echoed too closely the disasters that had already shaped her life. Samuel's weathered hands gripped the mantelpiece as he stared into the dancing flames, his massive shoulders carrying the weight of decisions that would affect not only his own future, but the lives of everyone who depended on Thunder Creek Ranch. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the gravity of a man who had learned that survival sometimes required choices that civilized society preferred to ignore. "Miss Martinez, if you remain here, you'll need to understand that Blackwood's methods extend beyond legal intimidation. He uses informants throughout the valley to gather intelligence about his targets, and he's not above threatening women to pressure their employers into compliance. Your safety would depend on more than simply staying within ranch boundaries." Elena felt a familiar chill of recognition as she understood the implications of Samuel's warning. Blackwood's systematic approach to destroying resistance included targeting anyone who might provide support or comfort to his opponents, making her presence at Thunder Creek Ranch a potential weapon that could be used against Samuel's determination. to protect his property. Are you suggesting that I would need to learn defensive skills beyond cooking? She asked, though her mind was already beginning to formulate the broader implications of remaining in a situation where violence seemed increasingly inevitable. Samuel turned from the fireplace to study her face with obvious concern, his blue eyes reflecting both admiration for her courage and worry about the dangers she would face if she chose to stay. Miss Martinez, frontier life requires practical skills that Eastern education doesn't typically include. If you're determined to remain at Thunder Creek Ranch, you'll need to learn to handle firearms, understand basic security procedures, and recognize warning signs that could save your life. The prospect of learning to use weapons felt surreal to Elena, whose California restaurant experience had never required more dangerous skills than managing sharp knives and hot ovens. Yet she recognized the necessity of Samuel's suggestions, understanding that Blackwood's threats represented genuine danger rather than mere business intimidation. "Mr. Whitmore," she said carefully, meeting his concerned gaze with determination that surprised her with its strength. "My grandmother survived the Mexican Revolution by learning to adapt to circumstances that required skills she never expected to need. I believe I inherited some of her resilience along with her cooking recipes." Samuel's expression showed both respect for her resolve and something deeper that Elena couldn't quite identify, as if her willingness to face danger alongside him had revealed qualities he hadn't expected to find in an Eastern cook seeking employment in Montana territory. The moment stretched between them with unspoken recognition of partnership that extended beyond simple employer and employee relationships. "In that case," Samuel said finally, his voice carrying new warmth along with its characteristic authority, "we should begin your additional education immediately." Jim Cooper served as a cavalry sergeant before coming to Thunder Creek Ranch, and he's probably the finest firearms instructor in Montana territory. Elena nodded acceptance while fighting to control the nervousness that threatened to overwhelm her determination. Learning to handle weapons represented a fundamental change in how she viewed herself and her capabilities, though she recognized that such adaptation might be essential for survival in circumstances she had never imagined facing. The sound of approaching footsteps on the porch interrupted their conversation, followed by Jim Cooper's distinctive knock on the front door. Samuel's immediate alertness suggested that late-night visits had become routine occurrences since Blackwood's pressure campaign had intensified, requiring constant vigilance against potential threats to ranch security. "Boss," Jim called through the heavy wooden door, "we've got a situation developing that you need to know about immediately." Samuel opened the door to reveal the ranch foreman's grim expression, his weathered face showing the strain of someone who had spent decades dealing with frontier challenges, but found current circumstances more troubling than usual. Behind him, Elena could see several ranch hands positioned strategically around the yard, their casual poses failing to disguise their readiness for whatever complications the night might bring. "What kind of situation?" Samuel asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the nature of Jim's concerns. The foreman stepped into the main room while maintaining visual contact with the ranch yard through the open doorway. "Two of our men rode into Millfield this afternoon to pick up supplies and gather information about Blackwood's activities. They just returned with news that's going to complicate everything we're trying to accomplish." Elena felt her stomach tighten with familiar dread as she recognized the pattern of escalating complications that had characterized the collapse of her California restaurant. Powerful interests like Blackwood rarely limited themselves to single-front attacks, preferring systematic campaigns that eliminated every possible avenue of resistance or escape. Samuel's expression darkened as he processed the implications of Jim's obvious concern. What did they learn in town? Jim Cooper's weathered hands clenched and unclenched as he delivered news that clearly troubled him deeply. Blackwood's been spreading word throughout the valley that Thunder Creek Ranch is harboring criminals and operating outside territorial law. He's claiming that our resistance to his legal claims proves we're hiding evidence of illegal activities that would be exposed by proper investigation. The accusation represented a sophisticated escalation of Blackwood's strategy, using public opinion and community pressure to isolate Thunder Creek Ranch from potential sources of support or sympathy. Elena recognized the tactic from Roberto's final desperate attempts to blame their restaurant's financial collapse on her supposed mismanagement rather than his gambling debts and systematic theft. "What specific claims is he making?" Samuel asked, his voice carrying the controlled anger of someone who understood the devastating effectiveness of well-crafted lies when spread throughout small communities. Jim's expression grew even grimmer as he continued his report. "He's telling folks that we've been rustling cattle from neighboring ranches and altering brands to hide the evidence. He claims that our resistance to his legal paperwork is really an attempt to prevent territorial marshals from discovering stolen livestock and fraudulent ownership documents." Elena felt cold fury rise in her chest as she recognized the systematic destruction of Samuel's reputation through carefully crafted accusations that would be almost impossible to disprove once they became accepted as community truth. Blackwood's strategy went beyond simple theft of property to include character assassination that would make rebuilding impossible even if legal challenges could somehow be overcome. Samuel's massive frame seemed to expand with barely contained rage as he understood the full implications of Blackwood's propaganda campaign. "Jim, how widely have these stories spread, and who's giving them credence?" The foreman's weathered face showed the pain of someone delivering news that he wished he didn't have to share. "Boss, I'm afraid the stories are finding receptive audiences among folks who've lost their own property to Blackwood's schemes. People want to believe that anyone still resisting him must be doing something wrong, because the alternative is accepting that honest work and legal ownership provide no protection against systematic theft." Elena understood the psychological dynamic that made Blackwood's lies so effective among people who had already suffered losses to his organization. Accepting that Thunder Creek Ranch was innocent would force community members to confront their own powerlessness and the futility of the compromises they had made to survive Blackwood's pressure campaigns. "What about Sheriff Hudson?" Samuel asked, referring to the territorial law enforcement officer responsible for maintaining order throughout Silverbrook Valley. "Has he made any statements about investigating these allegations?" Jim Cooper's expression grew even more troubled as he delivered the most disturbing aspect of his intelligence gathering. "Boss, Bill Hudson rode out of Millfield yesterday morning with orders to investigate reported cattle rustling activities at Thunder Creek Ranch. He's expected to arrive here tomorrow with a territorial marshal and paperwork, authorizing a complete search of our property and records." The news represented a devastating escalation of Blackwood's campaign, using official law enforcement to legitimize his theft of Samuel's property, while creating legal justification for whatever violence might be required to overcome resistance. Elena recognized the same pattern of purchased official cooperation that had made fighting Roberto's deception impossible through normal legal channels. Samuel's response demonstrated both his understanding of the trap being set for Thunder Creek Ranch and his determination to resist despite increasingly hopeless odds. "Jim, what's the likelihood that Hudson and this territorial marshal are operating independently rather than in coordination with Blackwood's organization?" The foreman's bitter laugh held no humor, only the cynical understanding of someone who had observed frontier justice for decades. "Boss, territorial marshals don't investigate cattle rustling complaints unless they're receiving pressure from interests with significant political influence. The timing of this investigation, combined with Blackwood's propaganda campaign, suggests coordination that goes well beyond coincidental circumstances." Elena felt the familiar sensation of walls closing in around honest people who lacked the resources and connections necessary to fight systematic corruption through official channels. Her California experience had taught her that purchased law enforcement represented the most dangerous aspect of organized criminal activity, removing any possibility of protection through legitimate appeals to authority. "Mr. Whitmore," she said quietly, her voice carrying conviction that surprised her with its strength, "it sounds like tomorrow's investigation will be designed to find evidence regardless of whether any actually exists. People like Blackwood don't conduct searches unless they're confident about the results they'll achieve." Samuel's blue eyes met hers with obvious appreciation for her understanding of their situation's gravity, while his expression showed something deeper that suggested her willingness to remain despite the dangers had affected him more profoundly than simple gratitude for an employee's loyalty. "Miss Martinez, you're absolutely correct about Blackwood's methods. The question now becomes what we can do to survive his next move while maintaining some hope of eventually proving our innocence and reclaiming our rights." Jim Cooper stepped forward with the urgency of someone who understood that time for planning was rapidly disappearing. "Boss, we need to make decisions tonight about what evidence we can protect and what defensive preparations we can complete before Hudson arrives with his search warrant." Elena found herself thinking like the business owner she had been in California, analyzing the situation from multiple perspectives while searching for vulnerabilities in Blackwood's strategy that might be exploited to Thunder Creek Ranch's advantage. Her experience with systematic deception had taught her to look beyond obvious threats toward underlying weaknesses that sophisticated criminals often overlooked. "Mr. Whitmore," she said carefully, "Blackwood's campaign depends on controlling the narrative about your guilt or innocence. What if we could demonstrate his deception in ways that couldn't be ignored or explained away by purchased officials?" Samuel's expression sharpened with interest as he recognized the strategic thinking behind her suggestion. "What kind of demonstration did you have in mind?" Elena felt her pulse quicken as ideas began forming that drew upon skills she had developed during her restaurant career, abilities that might prove useful in circumstances she had never imagined facing. Blackwood's lies about cattle rustling require evidence that supports his version of events. What if we could expose the process by which that evidence is being manufactured? The suggestion represented a fundamental shift from defensive resistance to active investigation of Blackwood's criminal methods, requiring risks and skills that none of them possessed through normal frontier experience. Yet Elena recognized that passive resistance had proven ineffective against systematic corruption, while aggressive investigation might reveal vulnerabilities that could be exploited to protect Thunder Creek Ranch. Jim Cooper's weathered face showed skeptical interest in Elena's proposal, though his expression suggested respect for strategic thinking that went beyond simple preparation for siege conditions. "Miss Martinez, what kind of investigation did you have in mind, and how would we conduct it without getting ourselves killed in the process?" Elena found herself drawing upon lessons learned during the collapse of her California restaurant, when desperate attempts to understand Roberto's deception had revealed patterns of systematic theft that extended far beyond simple embezzlement. "Mr. Cooper, Blackwood's operation requires coordination between multiple parties, including purchased officials, fabricated evidence, and financial resources that must be documented somewhere. Those records represent potential proof of his criminal activities." Samuel's massive frame seemed to straighten with renewed energy as he understood the implications of Elena's suggestion. "You're proposing that we investigate Blackwood's organization while pretending to cooperate with the official investigation of our supposed crimes." The strategy appealed to Elena's sense of justice while offering the possibility of turning Blackwood's systematic approach against him through careful intelligence gathering and documentation of his criminal methods. Her experience with business record keeping had taught her to recognize patterns of deception that might be invisible to people without accounting and organizational skills. "Mr. Whitmore, my restaurant experience included dealing with suppliers, contractors, and officials who required careful documentation of every transaction to prevent disputes or allegations of impropriety. I understand how to analyze financial records and identify discrepancies that reveal criminal activity. Samuel's expression showed growing excitement as he recognized the potential value of Elena's business skills when applied to investigating Blackwood's operations. Miss Martinez, if you're willing to undertake such dangerous work, your abilities could provide exactly the advantages we need to expose Blackwood's schemes before he succeeds in destroying Thunder Creek Ranch. Elena felt a surge of purpose that reminded her of the satisfaction she had derived from building her California restaurant into a successful operation before Roberto's betrayal had destroyed everything she had worked to create. The opportunity to use her skills in fighting systematic corruption offered the possibility of meaningful contribution to something larger than her own survival. Mr. Whitmore, I accept the risks involved in investigating Blackwood's organization. My experience with business deception has prepared me to recognize the patterns and vulnerabilities that might be exploited to protect Thunder Creek Ranch and expose the truth about his criminal activities. Jim Cooper studied Elena's determined expression with obvious respect for courage that he hadn't expected to find in an Eastern cook seeking employment in Montana Territory. Miss Martinez, if you're committed to this course of action, we'll need to move quickly to establish the intelligence gathering and security procedures that will keep you alive while you're collecting evidence against Blackwood. Samuel's voice carried new warmth along with its characteristic authority as he acknowledged Elena's willingness to risk everything in defense of Thunder Creek Ranch and the principles of honest work and legitimate ownership that Blackwood's schemes threaten to destroy throughout Silverbrook Valley. Miss Martinez, I want you to understand that accepting this mission will put you in greater danger than anything you faced in California. Blackwood kills people who threaten his operations. An investigation of his methods will make you a target for elimination rather than simple intimidation. Elena met Samuel's concerned gaze with determination that drew upon reserves of strength. She was still discovering within herself. Mr. Whitmore, my grandmother used to say that running from corruption only ensures that it will find you again in a different form. If we don't fight Blackwood here and now, he'll continue destroying honest people throughout Montana Territory until no one remembers what justice looks like. The massive rancher's expression showed both admiration for her courage and something deeper that Elena couldn't quite identify, as if her commitment to fighting alongside him had revealed feelings that extended beyond professional respect or gratitude for employee loyalty. The moment stretched between them with unspoken recognition of partnership that might grow into something neither had expected to find in circumstances dominated by danger and uncertainty. In that case, Samuel said finally, his voice carrying quiet intensity that sent warmth through Elena's entire body, we should begin planning immediately for an investigation that will either save Thunder Creek Ranch or get us all killed in the attempt. Elena nodded acceptance while fighting to control emotions that were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore, despite the deadly circumstances surrounding them. Her decision to stay and fight had been based on principles of justice and resistance to corruption, but she was beginning to recognize that her commitment to Samuel Whitmore involved feelings that had nothing to do with business partnerships or shared opposition to criminal threats. As Jim Cooper began outlining security procedures and Samuel described Blackwood's organizational structure, Elena found herself studying the massive rancher's profile in the firelight while memorizing details of his weathered features and noting the way his hands moved with surprising gentleness, despite their obvious strength. The recognition that she was falling in love with Samuel Whitmore added emotional complications to circumstances that were already dangerous enough to prove deadly for everyone involved. The sound of horses approaching Thunder Creek Ranch interrupted their planning session, causing immediate alertness among all three as they recognized that midnight visitors rarely brought welcome news during periods of escalating conflict with powerful enemies. Samuel moved toward the window with fluid grace that contradicted his massive size, while Jim Cooper positioned himself where he could observe the ranch yard while maintaining defensive options. "Boss," came Tommy Mitchell's voice from the porch, carried urgency that suggested developments requiring immediate attention. Riders approach him from the direction of Mill Field, moving fast and carrying torches that suggest official business rather than social visits. Elena felt her pulse quicken as she realized that Blackwood's timeline had accelerated beyond his stated 24-hour deadline, bringing whatever pressure he planned to apply against Thunder Creek Ranch forward into the current night rather than waiting for tomorrow's official investigation. Samuel's expression hardened with grim recognition of what midnight official visits typically meant when powerful interests sought to eliminate resistance through methods that avoided public scrutiny. "Jim, alert the men but keep them positioned defensively. If this is Sheriff Hudson arriving early, we want to appear cooperative rather than hostile." Elena found herself thinking strategically about the implications of premature official intervention in Blackwood's campaign against Thunder Creek Ranch, recognizing that advanced timing suggested either increased urgency or unexpected complications in whatever plans had been developed for destroying Samuel's resistance to the land grab scheme. The approaching torches grew brighter as riders materialized from the darkness surrounding Thunder Creek Ranch, their numbers and organization suggesting official authority rather than simple criminal intimidation. Elena counted at least 6 mounted figures, moving with the disciplined precision of law enforcement officers conducting planned operations rather than responding to emergency situations. As the riders drew closer to the ranch house, Elena prepared herself for revelations that would test everything she had committed herself to defending, understanding that the next few minutes would determine whether her investigation of Blackwood's criminal methods would ever have the opportunity to proceed beyond initial planning stages. Sheriff William Hudson dismounted from his horse with the practiced ease of someone who had spent decades in the saddle, his weathered face illuminated by torchlight as he approached Thunder Creek Ranch's main house. Elena studied the lawman's expression, searching for signs of corruption or honesty, while noting the way his 5 companions positioned themselves with tactical precision that suggested military training rather than simple law enforcement experience. "Samuel Whitmore," Hudson called out, his voice carrying official authority tempered by what sounded like genuine reluctance. "I've got territorial warrants that require immediate execution, and I'd prefer to handle this matter with minimal complications for everyone involved." Samuel stepped onto the porch with calm dignity that impressed Elena with its combination of respect for legitimate authority and quiet defiance of corrupt manipulation. His massive frame filled the doorway while his hands remained visible and unthreatening, demonstrating the careful balance required when dealing with potentially compromised officials who might be seeking excuses for violence. "Sheriff Hudson," Samuel replied, his voice steady despite the obvious tension of the situation. "You're welcome to examine any documentation or conduct any legitimate investigation of Thunder Creek Ranch operations. We have nothing to hide from. Honest law enforcement." Elena noticed the careful emphasis Samuel placed on the word honest, a subtle challenge that would force Hudson to reveal whether his midnight visit served legitimate law enforcement purposes or represented coordination with Blackwood's criminal schemes. The sheriff's response would determine whether any hope remained for resolving their situation through legal channels. Hudson's expression showed internal conflict as he processed Samuel's diplomatic response, his weathered features revealing the strain of someone caught between official duty and personal knowledge of systemic corruption. When he spoke again, his voice carried warning rather than threat, suggesting complications that extended beyond simple warrant execution. "Samuel, I've got orders from territorial headquarters to search these premises for evidence of cattle rustling and brand alteration. The warrant is legitimate and properly executed, but I want you to understand that my investigation is being conducted under unusual circumstances that concern me greatly." Elena felt a surge of hope as she recognized that Hudson's obvious reluctance might indicate integrity rather than corruption, suggesting the possibility that honest law enforcement still existed within Montana Territory's increasingly compromised system. The sheriff's willingness to express concerns about his orders implied internal resistance to whatever pressure had initiated the investigation. Samuel's response demonstrated both his intelligence and his determination to exploit any opportunity for legitimate legal resolution of their crisis. "Sheriff, Thunder Creek Ranch's books and records are available for your examination, and our cattle bear legitimate brands that can be verified through territorial registration documents. What specific evidence has led to allegations of criminal activity?" Hudson glanced toward his companions with obvious unease before answering Samuel's direct question, his body language suggesting awareness that their conversation was being monitored by interests that extended beyond normal law enforcement supervision. "Samuel, the complaints originated from sources claiming knowledge of systematic cattle theft throughout Silverbrook Valley, with specific allegations that Thunder Creek Ranch serves as a central hub for rustling operations." Elena immediately recognized the sophisticated nature of Blackwood's strategy in generating official investigation through fabricated complaints that would be difficult to disprove even when completely false. The accusations were designed to shift the burden of proof onto Thunder Creek Ranch, while creating legal justification for whatever discovery of evidence might be required to support predetermined conclusions. "Sheriff Hudson," Elena said, stepping forward with careful respect for his authority while positioning herself where her words could reach his companions as well as the sheriff himself. "I'm Elena Martinez, recently employed as cook for Thunder Creek Ranch. As someone new to this community, I've observed operations here with fresh eyes and can attest to the legitimate nature of everything I've witnessed." Hudson's attention focused on Elena with obvious interest, as if her perspective as an outsider might provide valuable intelligence about the situation he was being required to investigate. "Miss Martinez, what specific observations have you made about ranch operations that would be relevant to allegations of cattle rustling?" Elena chose her words with the precision she had learned during her restaurant career when dealing with health inspectors and business license officials who wielded significant power over her livelihood. "Sheriff, I've observed meticulous record-keeping, legitimate branding procedures, and cattle that clearly belong to Thunder Creek Ranch based on documentation that extends back decades. More importantly, I've observed systematic pressure from Marcus Blackwood and his organization to force Mr. Whitmore into selling his property through threats and intimidation." The mention of Blackwood's name caused visible tension among Hudson's companions, their reaction suggesting awareness of the political sensitivities surrounding any investigation that might implicate the Montana Land Development Company in criminal activities. Elena recognized that she had identified the core issue that made honest law enforcement difficult in circumstances dominated by powerful interests. Hudson's expression showed both appreciation for Elena's directness and concern about the implications of her accusations against one of Montana Territory's most influential businessmen. "Miss Martinez, those are serious allegations that would require substantial evidence to support any official investigation of Mr. Blackwood's business practices." Elena felt the familiar frustration of dealing with official reluctance to confront systematic corruption, though she recognized that Hudson's position was far more precarious than her own, given the political pressures that governed territorial law enforcement. "Sheriff, I understand the difficulties involved in investigating powerful interests, but I also understand the importance of distinguishing between legitimate business practices and criminal intimidation." Samuel moved to Elena's side with protective instincts that she found both touching and strategically valuable, his massive presence serving as both physical and emotional support while reinforcing her credibility through his obvious respect for her judgment. Sheriff Hudson, Miss Martinez has business experience that enables her to recognize patterns of systematic deception and manipulation. Her observations deserve serious consideration. One of Hudson's companions stepped forward with obvious impatience. At the extended discussion, his aggressive demeanor suggesting sympathies that aligned more closely with Blackwood's interests than with honest law enforcement. "Sheriff, we have warrants to execute and evidence to collect. These people can present their version of events during formal proceedings if they choose to dispute our findings." Elena immediately recognized the man's eagerness to conclude investigation without thorough examination of evidence, understanding that predetermined conclusions required minimal actual investigation while creating legal justification for whatever actions Blackwood's organization planned to take against Thunder Creek Ranch. Hudson's sharp look toward his subordinate revealed tension within the law enforcement team itself, suggesting internal conflicts about the proper execution of their official duties. Deputy Martinez will conduct this investigation properly and thoroughly, examining all relevant evidence before reaching any conclusions about criminal activity. The sheriff's insistence on proper procedures provided Elena with hope that honest investigation might still be possible despite the obvious pressure being applied to produce specific results. She recognized an opportunity to present evidence that might change the trajectory of Hudson's inquiry while exposing the systematic nature of Blackwood's criminal schemes. "Sheriff Hudson," Elena said carefully, "before you begin searching Thunder Creek Ranch, would you be willing to examine evidence that demonstrates the pattern of systematic pressure being applied to force Mr. Whitmore into selling his property?" Hudson's expression showed genuine interest in Elena's offer, though his glance toward his companions revealed awareness that departing from standard warrant execution procedures might create complications with his superiors. "Miss Martinez, what kind of evidence are you referring to?" Elena felt her pulse quicken as she recognized the crucial nature of the moment, understanding that Hudson's willingness to examine evidence of Blackwood's criminal methods might represent the only opportunity to prevent Thunder Creek Ranch's destruction through fabricated legal charges. "Sheriff, I have documentation and witness statements that demonstrate systematic intimidation, false accusations, and coordination between the Montana Land Development Company and corrupt officials throughout this investigation." The accusation of official corruption caused immediate tension among Hudson's companions, several of whom moved their hands closer to their weapons while exchanging glances that suggested coordination beyond normal law enforcement protocols. Elena realized that her direct challenge had forced whatever corrupt elements existed within the group to reveal themselves through their defensive reactions. Samuel stepped protectively closer to Elena while maintaining his calm demeanor, his massive frame serving as a physical barrier between her and the increasingly hostile deputies. "Sheriff Hudson, Thunder Creek Ranch has maintained detailed records of every interaction with Blackwood's organization, including documented threats, intimidation tactics, and attempts to manipulate legal proceedings." Hudson's weathered face showed internal struggle as he weighed his official obligations against growing evidence that his investigation was being manipulated by interests that had little connection to legitimate law enforcement. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had decided to prioritize truth over political expediency. "Miss Martinez, I'm willing to examine your evidence before proceeding with the warrant execution. If you can demonstrate systematic manipulation of this investigation, it would significantly affect how I conduct my duties here tonight." Elena felt overwhelming relief at Hudson's willingness to consider evidence of Blackwood's corruption. Recognizing that honest law enforcement still existed within Montana Territory's compromise system. "Sheriff, the documentation is in the ranch office, including correspondence, witness statements, and financial records that reveal the scope of Blackwood's criminal operations." The aggressive deputy who had earlier pushed for immediate warrant execution stepped forward with obvious hostility toward any delay in their predetermined course of action. Sheriff Hudson, Territorial Headquarters expects prompt execution of valid warrants, not extended discussion of unsubstantiated allegations against respected businessmen. Elena immediately recognized the deputy's language as revealing coordination with interests that extended beyond normal law enforcement channels, understanding that his resistance to examining evidence demonstrated corruption rather than professional diligence. Deputy, surely honest investigation requires examining all relevant evidence rather than limiting inquiry to predetermined conclusions. The deputy's hand moved toward his weapon with reflexive aggression that confirmed Elena's suspicions about his true loyalties, though Hudson's immediate intervention prevented the situation from escalating into violence. Deputy Martinez, you will not threaten civilians during the execution of legal warrants. Miss Martinez has offered to provide evidence relevant to our investigation, and we will examine that evidence before proceeding. Elena felt profound gratitude toward Hudson for maintaining professional standards despite obvious pressure from within his own organization, recognizing that his integrity represented the difference between justice and systematic oppression throughout Montana Territory. Sheriff, I appreciate your commitment to thorough investigation rather than predetermined conclusions. Samuel led the way toward the ranch office while maintaining protective awareness of the hostile deputies whose reactions had revealed coordination with Blackwood's organization. Sheriff Hudson, the documentation we've prepared demonstrates not only Blackwood's intimidation tactics, but also the systematic nature of his assault on independent ranchers throughout Silverbrook Valley. The ranch office contained extensive records that Elena had helped organize during her brief time at Thunder Creek Ranch, applying her business experience to create documentation that would support legal defense against whatever charges Blackwood's organization might fabricate. Her California restaurant experience had taught her the importance of meticulous record-keeping when dealing with potentially corrupt officials. Hudson examined the correspondence between Samuel and various territorial officials with obvious surprise at the scope of Blackwood's systematic pressure campaign, his weathered features showing growing understanding of the political forces that had initiated his investigation. Samuel, this documentation suggests coordination between the Montana Land Development Company and territorial officials that extends far beyond normal business relationships. Elena watched Hudson's examination of their evidence with growing hope that honest law enforcement might still be capable of confronting systematic corruption when presented with overwhelming proof of criminal activity. Sheriff, the pattern revealed by those documents demonstrates that Thunder Creek Ranch is being targeted through coordinated legal and financial pressure, designed to force compliance with Blackwood's expansion schemes. The hostile deputy moved closer to examine the documentation with obvious intent to discredit whatever evidence might threaten Blackwood's operations, his aggressive demeanor confirming Elena's assessment of his true loyalties. Sheriff, correspondence and business records can be easily fabricated to support any version of events that serves the interests of people facing legitimate criminal charges. Hudson's sharp response to his subordinate's attempt to dismiss evidence without examination revealed growing suspicion about the deputy's motivations and the nature of their investigation. Deputy Martinez, we will evaluate evidence based on its substance and verifiability rather than predetermined assumptions about its validity. These documents appear authentic and raise serious questions about the circumstances that initiated our investigation. Elena felt excitement building as she recognized that Hudson's integrity might provide the foundation for exposing Blackwood's criminal network while protecting Thunder Creek Ranch from fabricated charges. Sheriff, we also have witness statements from other ranchers who have faced similar pressure from Blackwood's organization, demonstrating the systematic nature of his schemes throughout the territory. Samuel produced additional documentation that revealed the scope of Blackwood's operations, including evidence of coordination with corrupt officials and financial records that suggested money laundering through legitimate business enterprises. Sheriff Hudson. This evidence demonstrates that allegations against Thunder Creek Ranch represent retaliation for our resistance to systematic criminal activity rather than legitimate law enforcement concerns. Hudson's examination of the witness. Statements and financial documentation revealed patterns of corruption that extended far beyond simple cattle rustling allegations, suggesting organized criminal activity that involved territorial officials and business leaders throughout Montana. Territory. Samuel. This evidence suggests criminal conspiracy that would fall under federal jurisdiction rather than territorial law enforcement. Elena immediately recognized the significance of Hudson's observation, understanding that federal involvement might provide protection from corrupt territorial officials, while creating opportunities for systematic investigation of Blackwood's entire network. Sheriff. Would federal marshals be able to investigate these allegations without interference from territorial political interests? Hudson's weathered face showed both hope and concern as he considered the implications of involving federal law enforcement in circumstances that had been carefully controlled by territorial officials, sympathetic to Blackwood's interests. Ms. Martinez. Federal investigation would certainly provide independence from local political pressure, but it would also escalate this situation beyond anything that could be resolved through compromise or negotiation. The aggressive deputy stepped forward with obvious alarm at the suggestion of federal involvement in what had been designed as a simple fabrication of evidence to support Blackwood's land grab scheme. Sheriff Hudson. Territorial headquarters specifically instructed us to resolve this matter quickly and efficiently without involving federal authorities in local business disputes. Elena felt cold fury rise in her chest as she recognized the deputy's language as revealing direct coordination with Blackwood's organization rather than legitimate law enforcement priorities. Deputy. Surely criminal conspiracy involving territorial officials would require federal investigation, regardless of local political preferences. Samuel's massive frame tensed with barely controlled anger as he understood the full implications of the deputy's resistance to honest investigation. Sheriff Hudson. It's becoming clear that some members of your team are more concerned with protecting Blackwood's interests than with conducting legitimate law enforcement. Hudson's expression hardened with growing understanding of the corruption within his own organization as he observed his subordinates' reactions to evidence of systematic criminal activity. Deputy Martinez. Your resistance to examining evidence and involving appropriate federal authorities suggests loyalties that conflict with honest law enforcement. I'm relieving you of duty pending investigation of your conduct during this operation. The corrupt deputy's hand moved toward his weapon with desperate aggression as he realized that his coordination with Blackwood's organization had been exposed, forcing a confrontation that would determine whether honest law enforcement could survive within Montana Territory's compromise system. Sheriff, you're making a serious mistake that will have consequences extending far beyond this investigation. Elena felt terror and excitement in equal measure as she recognized that the moment of truth had arrived, determining whether corruption or justice would prevail in the conflict that had consumed her life since accepting employment at Thunder Creek Ranch. Samuel moved protectively between her and the hostile deputy, while Hudson faced the choice between integrity and political survival. Deputy Martinez. Hudson said with quiet authority that carried the weight of decades in law enforcement, draw your weapon and you'll be arrested for threatening civilians and obstruction of justice. Stand down immediately and surrender your badge and firearms. The corrupt deputy hesitated for a moment that seemed to stretch infinitely, his hand hovering over his weapon while he calculated the odds of fighting his way out of a situation that had collapsed around Blackwood's carefully planned scheme. Elena held her breath as she watched the confrontation that would determine not only her immediate survival, but the future of honest ranching throughout Silverbrook Valley. 3 of Hudson's remaining deputies moved to support their sheriffs. authority, while the fourth revealed his own corruption by drawing his weapon in support of the exposed deputy. The ranch yard erupted into chaos as honest law enforcement faced corrupt officials in a gunfight that would determine the fate of Thunder Creek Ranch and everyone who had chosen to defend it. Samuel threw himself protectively over Elena as bullets began flying around the ranch office, his massive body shielding her from violence, while Jim Cooper and the ranch hands joined the battle against corrupt officials who had been sent to fabricate evidence supporting Blackwood's criminal schemes. The sound of gunfire echoed across Silverbrook Valley like thunder, announcing the storm that would cleanse Montana territory of systematic corruption. Elena found herself pressed against the ranch office floor beneath Samuel's protective bulk, her heart racing with terror and admiration for the courage being displayed by honest people who refused to surrender to organized crime disguised as law enforcement. The battle raging around them represented everything she had hoped to find when she decided to fight, rather than flee from circumstances that demanded choice between justice and survival. The gunfight lasted only minutes before corrupt deputies lay dead or wounded, while honest law enforcement emerged victorious, though Elena realized that their triumph represented only the beginning of a larger conflict with Blackwood's organization and its network of purchased officials throughout Montana territory. Hudson stood over the wounded corrupt deputy with grim satisfaction at having purged his organization of criminal elements while protecting civilians who had demonstrated extraordinary courage in exposing systematic corruption. Miss Martinez, your evidence has revealed criminal conspiracy that will require extensive federal investigation. But you've also helped eliminate corrupt officials who were betraying their oaths to protect and serve honest citizens. Elena felt overwhelming relief at surviving the confrontation, while recognizing that their victory had been purchased through violence that would have consequences extending far beyond Thunder Creek Ranch. Sheriff Hudson, what happens next to people who've exposed criminal conspiracy involving territorial officials? Samuel helped Elena to her feet with gentle strength that contrasted dramatically with the violence that had just erupted around them, his blue eyes showing concern for her welfare, along with satisfaction at having successfully defended his property and principles. Miss Martinez, we've proven that honest resistance to systematic corruption can succeed when people find the courage to stand together against organized crime. Hudson began documenting the scene while explaining the federal investigation that would follow their exposure of criminal conspiracy involving territorial officials and business leaders throughout Montana territory. Miss Martinez, your courage in gathering evidence and presenting it at the crucial moment has made the difference between justice and the triumph of systematic corruption. Federal marshals will want extensive testimony about everything you've observed and documented. Elena found herself thinking about the transformation she had undergone since accepting employment at Thunder Creek Ranch, recognizing that circumstances had revealed strengths and capabilities she had never suspected she possessed. Her decision to fight rather than flee had led to victory against forces that had seemed overwhelmingly powerful when she faced them alone. Sheriff Hudson, she said with voice that carried new confidence earned through surviving mortal danger while defending justice, I'm prepared to provide whatever testimony federal investigators require to ensure that Blackwood's criminal network is completely dismantled and prevented from threatening other honest people throughout Montana territory. Samuel's expression showed profound admiration for Elena's courage, along with something deeper that had been growing between them throughout their shared ordeal. Miss Martinez, your intelligence and determination have saved not only Thunder Creek Ranch but probably dozens of other properties that would have fallen to Blackwood's schemes if his corruption hadn't been exposed. The massive rancher's words carried emotional weight that went beyond simple gratitude for professional competence, suggesting feelings that had developed despite the deadly circumstances that had brought them together. Elena found herself studying Samuel's weathered features in the lamplight, while recognizing that her commitment to fighting corruption had led to something she had never expected to find in Montana territory. "Mr. Whitmore," she said softly, meeting his blue eyes with recognition of emotions that had been building throughout their partnership in defending Thunder Creek Ranch. "I've discovered that fighting for justice alongside someone you respect can create bonds that extend far beyond simple business relationships or shared opposition to criminal threats." Samuel's massive hands took hers with surprising gentleness as he acknowledged feelings that had grown stronger through every moment of shared danger and mutual support. "Elena, you've shown me that true partnership requires someone who will stand beside you when principles matter more than safety, and who brings intelligence and courage that make victory possible when circumstances seem hopeless." The use of her first name carried intimacy that acknowledged the transformation of their relationship from employer and employee to partners united by shared values and mutual respect that had deepened into love through their successful resistance to systematic corruption. Elena felt warmth spreading through her entire body as she recognized that her search for security and purpose had led to something far more valuable than she had ever imagined possible. Hudson completed his documentation while making arrangements for federal investigation of the criminal conspiracy they had exposed, his weathered face showing satisfaction at having helped honest people triumph over organized crime that had been corrupting Montana Territory's legal and political systems. "Samuel, Elena," the sheriff said with obvious respect for what they had accomplished together, "federal marshals will arrive within a week to begin systematic investigation of Blackwood's entire network. Your evidence and testimony will provide the foundation for prosecutions that will restore honest law enforcement throughout this territory." Elena found herself imagining a future where Thunder Creek Ranch could operate without constant threat from criminal organizations, where her cooking skills could be devoted to nourishing hard-working people rather than supporting desperate resistance to systematic corruption. The possibility of building something positive rather than simply fighting against destruction filled her with excitement about opportunities that lay ahead. "Sheriff Hudson," she said with gratitude for his integrity in choosing justice over political expediency, "thank you for demonstrating that honest law enforcement still exists when people find the courage to support it against organized corruption." Samuel's arm settled around Elena's shoulders with protective tenderness that acknowledged both the danger they had survived together and the future they hoped to build in circumstances that would allow love to flourish, alongside their shared commitment to defending justice and honest work. As dawn approached over Silverbrook Valley, Elena found herself standing beside the massive rancher whose employment offer had led to adventures she could never have imagined when she fled California seeking a fresh start in Montana Territory. Her decision to fight rather than flee had revealed strengths she had never suspected while creating a partnership that promised to last far beyond their successful resistance to Blackwood's criminal schemes. "Elena," Samuel said with voice that carried both triumph at their victory and anticipation of the future they could build together, "you've shown me that the right person can transform any challenge into an opportunity for growth and discovery. Will you consider making Thunder Creek Ranch your permanent home rather than simply your place of employment?" Elena felt joy spreading through her entire being as she recognized that Samuel's proposal offered everything she had hoped to find when she decided to rebuild her life in Montana Territory. "Samuel, I've learned that true sanctuary isn't found in safety, but in partnership with someone whose principles and courage match your own. Thunder Creek Ranch became my home the moment I decided to fight for it alongside you." Their kiss sealed a partnership that had been forged through shared danger and mutual respect, creating a foundation for love that would endure whatever challenges the future might bring to people who had chosen to stand together against any threat to justice, honesty, and the freedom to build something valuable through honest work and principled resistance to corruption. As federal marshals arrived to begin systematic dismantling of Blackwood's criminal network, Elena and Samuel began planning not only for Thunder Creek Ranch's expansion and prosperity, but for a family that would carry their values into the next generation of Montana Territory's development. The mail-order bride who had discovered her intended husband was corrupt had found something far more valuable than security, a love that had been tested by fire and proven stronger than any challenge they might face together. Elena Martinez, the traveling cook who had sought employment to escape financial ruin, had become Elena Whitmore, partner to the giant rancher whose heart proved as vast as the Montana landscape he called home. Their story would be told throughout Silverbrook Valley as proof that courage and integrity could triumph over any corruption when people found the strength to stand together for principles that mattered more than comfort or safety. The woman who had once feared she was too independent for conventional marriage had discovered that true love required not submission, but partnership between equals who chose to face every challenge together, creating sanctuary not through hiding from the world's dangers, but through building strength sufficient to overcome whatever threats might arise against honest people who refuse to surrender their dreams to systematic corruption or organized greed. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.